You're listening to The Blunt Truth. Unscripted, uncensored, unwoke. Get ready to challenge everything.
Welcome to episode 10 of the Blunt Truth podcast, here with a very dear friend of mine, Sheila. We've been connected for a number of years, and we are going to be talking about imagination.
Hello. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
My honor, my pleasure, super excited. And we actually were getting pretty into it with imagination and visualization and like dream state talk. So I was like, we got to hit record and capture some of this. And just to catch up the listeners a little bit, we were speaking about how our whole lives, when we would be falling asleep, we would see these like colors and shapes and patterns, which came from talking about what imagination really is. So maybe we'll start there for the listeners. What is imagination? I know I mentioned it has to do with like surrender, and it's not something you do in your mind. You said that. I love that. It's something that just happens. So tell me more about your conception of imagination and what it is.
Yeah, I feel like it's ultimately something divine. Like it's this divine connection. I feel it as inside me. And yeah, it's so much about, I've noticed about surrender and just being in it and letting it happen versus the imagination that's making up a story in your mind, which I suppose it is a type of imagination, but it feels like a very restricted, sort of limited version of it when you can just, yeah, it's surrendering. And so much is the hard part.
No, what
Like,
you said about it not being in your mind, not being a story in your mind, I think is really important because people do that. I do that, not only with imagination, but with so many things. Like we just intellectualize it instead of embodying it. And this is a really interesting example of that because the mind, it happens within the mind in a sense, but it's not anything that you're driving.
exactly. Yes. Right. That's a perfect way to say it. It is happening in your mind, but you're not driving it. And when you ground it into your body, yeah, it's funny. I've never thought about imagination in this way, but how people say that about emotions and stuff too. Can't just intellectualize your emotions. And that was the maladaptive coping mechanism or trap that I fell into most of my young life. Was I had all of these extremely intense sensations in my body, like very super intense emotions and super intense vivid imagination, and just even like my actual body is like super, super sensitive. I used to wear all my clothes inside out because the themes bothered me. So I think that sort of scared me out of my body, and yeah, it brought everything up into my head and everything. I felt like I was always floating around up there and could never come back down enough to actually be alive and be a human. And yeah, that's interesting. These last years I've been learning about the emotions and feeling, actually, like how to feel emotions. I really didn't get how to do that. And now I realize that I've made the same shift with my imagining, where before it was just making up these stories. And it's interesting to think about like how things had manifested in my life from that versus the difference between that being like a very like unstable and not I feel like not good way to manifest life versus this being in your body and just surrendering and essentially letting God imagine through you. And just,
Yeah, no, that's
yeah,
really good.
yeah. And the difference between how life appears from that is extremely profound.
Yeah. There's a rabbi I follow on Instagram, and he talks about so much of what so-called autistic children and ADHD children suffer from and what we label as an empath is really just the actual inherent like pain and discomfort of soul embodiment. Like just being a soul, having to be in 3D, there's a lot of just inherent discomfort that comes when you recognize who you are and you identify from that place. So my story with emotions mirrors what you said a lot. When my mom passed away, I was 8.5, and really my emotional growth stunted. So I was logically hyper developing. I was doing well in extracurricular. I was learning computer programming. I was a top tier competitive gamer, but I never was feeling anything. I was binge eating all my emotions. I would get 2 lunches at school every day and then binge eat at night when my dad would come home, like Taco Bell or Burger King at like midnight. It was like so bad, like middle school, I mean, grade school, middle school, high school, right? So no feeling of emotions. And then I'm 18, 19, like severely depressed, like stuck in bed, can't even get out of bed for a month. And this happened for the second time. And I was like, I need to go to a therapist. I need to see a psychologist. I was majoring in psychology in college at the same time. And the first major realization we had was that my emotional maturity was that of a 9-year-old child. And it was just like clear as day discussing, like her relaying that to me and realizing it that here I am, like 18 years old, 19 years old, but emotionally, very much a 9-year-old boy in my day-to-day life. So I worked really hard on my emotions and embodying them. And she would be like, "How are you?" And I would just be like, "I don't know." For like most of the first year of therapy. No, I definitely understand that process. When I did have my spiritual awareness increase 2016, 2017, which is, I guess, the imagination is almost like the spiritual version of emotions or something.
Yeah, ooh, that's an interesting correlation. I like that. You'll
Yeah. And we were talking how our first experiences with this heavenly, divine, etheric, almost omnipresent fabric that we're calling imagination and like attuning to or tapping into began as children. And our earliest memories are very similar here. And I'll let you take the stage here in describing your experiences with it. I describe it as that surrender when you fall asleep and you start seeing lights and blobs and shapes and stuff.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, just, like, closing your eyes. Like, it's interesting, like, I was musing about I wonder what that is. Is it, like, a portal you're going through almost, it feels, or you're, like it's almost feels to me like you're going through, like, layers of those beaded curtains or something as you're, like, going into yourself and into that sort of within space inside of you. There's these beautiful designs and lights and stuff that are like curtains or veils that I feel like I'm almost walking through. And I until you propositioned this interview, I never really thought about what are these things I see and have always seen when I just close my eyes, relax, and start just drifting and like looking, I guess, looking at the eyelids.
You said a lot of good things there, and they're connected. And I like the idea of, I had mentioned it's like going to a different dimension, but when you talk about the purely visual aspect of its lights and blobs, and then like you said, they turn orange, they get colored. And for me, they get colored too. It just hasn't happened since I was a child that way, but it'll literally morph into a detailed scene. But it is a process. It's not instantly. And it's a little different every time too. And a lot of times you'll stop remembering before it becomes a scene, at least for me. But the fact that dreams are where you can become lucid, and dreams are where people can have out of body experiences, and dreams are where people can do remote viewing type of activities and behaviors. And then the idea of visually going through these different like layers where it's literally revealing a layer of visuals underneath it and then revealing a layer of visuals underneath it very much seems like imagination is like a portal to inside yourself, Imagination is like a portal to this space where anything's possible.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm just really caught up in this feeling how infinite it is inside. How ever since I was little, I've always known that was something super important in life. But I didn't first until I was like maybe just the last few years, I didn't understand like how to use it. And I know I misused it in a way too, just because of how I think the world and society and stuff can influence your imagination. And I was lucky in that I was very sheltered for a large portion of my childhood. So there really wasn't that many external influences. And I feel like some parts of my imagination were very pure, but then there was also stress growing up and stress in relationships. And I was very isolated and didn't really, I never really fully connected to anyone, attached securely to anyone, even my parents or siblings and stuff. I loved them, they loved me, we were very close, but I never, until basically now, I'm doing it finally, like never really knew how to securely attach to anyone. So I can also see how that kind of colored my imagination in a way.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So mind blowing what you said. I mean, it's easy to say society uses our imagination against us, but it really is almost the key to the matrix, really, in the sense that I never thought about how much of propaganda is about getting us to imagine certain things. I mean, you can look at pornography, even that is imagining a certain type of activity with a certain type of person. And even politics, just imagining somebody and sending hate towards them. And like,
Imagine how they're going to make the world happen or like things that are going to happen.
yeah,
Yeah.
and when you look at it through that lens, you really do realize it's a superpower. And I I myself struggle with securely attaching. I actually helped create a podcast called Rewire Your Attachment Style for an amazing attachment coach called Maya Diamond. So I learned a little bit about that stuff while producing it and realized I'm very reactive in my attachment. And thinking about how that connects to imagination is a whole interesting avenue as well, because how people co-create is by visioning the same thing. How you multiply the manifestative power of imaginations by doing it together, by imagining the same things together with the same emotional energy. And so what that means is that the vision has to be aligned, the mission has to be aligned, the values have to be aligned in order for multiple people to be seeing this thing for the same reasons and wanting it to unfold the same way, so to speak. And I never considered that either, but it's totally true. I'm very similar to my family. Very recently, past 18 months, I live here in my dad's basement. I love him. I help caretake for him. He's on dialysis. And so it's a beautiful thing. And could I imagine him having more similar values and mission and vision and us being closer? Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm a little bit independent, unconventional, fringe, whatever you might want to say. And so that really does limit the imagination, at least the co-creative aspect where it really shines. So I love that.
Yeah. And yeah, the co-creative aspect of it has always been, I'm realizing like my favorite part of it, I think, and what I always really longed for, it felt like I never had because I was so different from everybody in my family and everybody in my community. It always felt like the odd one out, the weirdo, and thought that I had to go somewhere else to ever feel like I belonged. And then did that. And of course, it didn't work. Coming back here again and starting from scratch and like realizing home is where my heart is and I belong inside myself if I feel like I do because I'm creating that with my imagination. And it's been fascinating actually. The more I've just shown up as authentically me in every situation to the best of my ability, even with people that I previously thought, oh my gosh, there is absolutely no way they're going to get XYZ that I see this way. They're never going to see it the same way. It's been amazing how people have just things have just shifted and it makes somehow makes total sense in reality, like how it pans out. But yeah, once I make that shift inside myself, essentially inside my imagination, it just appears in this way that feels so right.
Easy, effortless.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was gonna say that it's nothing that you could ever force. If I tried to do in the past, I mean, I tried this probably. I tried to convince people of my viewpoints or I want to be more comfortable. So I'm gonna try to convince these people to be more like me or convince them to see things more in my way in this sort of like overt way versus just yeah, like going into that infinite space inside of me and knowing that I belong wherever I am and trusting that a lot of it, I guess, has to do with trusting God's path, knowing.
God's factory. That's a really good thing to call it. Did you say God's factory?
No, I didn't, but that
No, that's what my live caption said. What did you say?
I said God's path for
Path for you. Oh,
but
that makes total sense. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's
no, that's
really
good though. I love misunderstandings like that, which is funny because I was saying like misunderstandings are like my fears when it comes to interviews or like being recorded or talking or like expressing my views. But I've actually had this happen many times now where it's someone mishears something or I mishear something or we're talking about two different things at the same time. But yeah, and then you get like something like God's factory.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I
Ah.
well, I was tracking you completely. And then that was the first typo on my captions. I use captions to help me understand. And it's just such a wild coincidence that like my deciding to interject was the very first typo on the captions. That's just so funny. But no, I'm going to tie that back in a second, if I may. But
Yeah.
I resonate so much with what you shared, especially in business, just because that's the domain where I think I deploy imagination the least just because of society programming. And I'm always working hard. I'm always like taking action and just putting energy and exerting, even a real true self care, being an actual part of my life is like pretty brand new for me. But there have been times in the past when I've truly practiced. And look, not just recently, but also in the past, there are times when I just pedal to the metal, try really hard for something, and it's just not happening. And I'll literally be like, screw it, I'm taking a day off. And I'll get like a message or a text from a client or a prospect. And I'm like, what? And even recently with this, I'm building a consulting community and I was just pushing really hard, pushing on people really hard, following up really hard. And I just said, you know what? Screw this. Just chill. Focus on self care because it's easy to say, but it's hard to do when you have a plan and goals. And so I was leaning into imagination literally, and I've gotten pretty good at it. I practiced it enough to be like, again, it's not that mental exercise when I do it. It's how does it feel in my heart when those clients are asking for me to teach them stuff every single day? How does it feel in my heart for my family and my pets and my loved ones when I have just a surplus of money flowing? And what am I planning next? And everything holistic, right? How does it feel? What music's playing in the background? Whatever. It's that emotional frequency of the timeline and you tune into it. And like you said, you'll like literally, I have 2 calls with prospects that are presumably wanting to pay me like right after we record this episode. And that sounds like super like Matilda's dad, like salesy and trashy, but it literally just happened off the back of me, maybe within the past week, spending like 3 nights of actually doing it. It's absolutely true. And it sounds so woo, and a lot of people that in the entrepreneurship space don't like to hear it because it's God's factory. It's not your job to and do the assembly line and build the future. You just figure out the end product that you want and God will put it together for you.
Exactly, exactly. Oh my God, this makes me so happy because I it's I've realized that it's literally doing it like this very pure imagination way is the only way I can really handle doing life. Like my body cannot handle the grind hustle thing. I tried that. Like I worked as a nurse for a long time. And it's funny because I had a friend who told me this like money that you make from a space of the energy, like not good energy, like negative energy, or like, ah, I just have to do this, but I hate this job. Like, no matter how much money you make, it's probably just going to get siphoned off somehow. It's going to disappear. And sure enough, I made so much money and literally 100% of it is gone. And I'm like, been from scratch these last couple of years.
Me
And
too.
so yeah, so it's so fascinating how and every time, like, even I still even fall back into that, oh God, like I'm not doing anything, like what I need to do something. And that's always been what I've struggled with after I got out of the pure doing, like pushing thing and realized, okay, that's what's destroying my life, making me depressed, making me sick. I'm just not, this is not me. And then I flipped to like the complete opposite of just like nothing. I don't know what to do. And but now I'm realizing, like I've heard stories like you were saying, how when you've got this little, you're getting to more of the balance between the doing and the surrendering. It's opening up. I feel like the surrendering and the imagining part of it is like you're like essentially opening up space in yourself. Like I visualize it as like down to my capillaries. That was my recent thing. Like just seeing like all of every single teeny tiny little capillary in my entire body just being open for the divine energy and for God to come in. And that really what comes of that is going to be aligned your purpose or the promise. It's this I read this recently. It described as the promise you made to God before you were born of like what your mission here is going to be. And like you as a human are never gonna be able to puzzle that out. Like you just have to like let it come in. And so it's really, it feels very reassuring for me to hear from you how it can manifest into actual action happening. And it's funny that literally just the other day I was getting all in my head about, okay, Sheila, you haven't not doing anything that other people are going to consider you doing. I'm doing things, but they're all very just spontaneous, random, like things that come up. And I want to get in this direction of having a life and being able to have financial abundance in a way that feels good to me. And I haven't figured that out yet, but I just keep knowing like this is how I'm supposed to do it. It doesn't matter that to the average person in society, it's gonna look like I'm being lazy or not doing anything. There's so much happening under the surface, and then things like this pop up, like you asking me to do an interview.
Oh, facts. And trust me, I am the most, anti-government. The system's against me. Everything's controlled. But if I had to fight that belief so much and really test it as a hardcore skeptic who's against this giant human control system, dude, and I'll say the law of polarity matters here because we all hear about the 50% of wealthy people that got there being assholes, but very rarely do we hear the 50% of wealthy people that got there by creating value and being of service and caring and giving a shit. So it's like you got to meet those people and find them. And it only takes a couple to inspire you enough. And anyone listening can do that. I love what you said about, well, I love how you equate imagination with self-care. Like that is almost a revolutionary thing because a lot of times in this society, people struggle with fake self-care. Like they'll watch propaganda on Netflix and they'll scroll on social media. And it's like, that's not self-care. Going to Starbucks, drinking a bunch of bullshit is not self-care. And I think the great barometer here is imagination. Does it expand? Does it open? Does it inspire that kind of imagination frequency? And I love what you said about the purpose of that being to open up space. That's what happens when you do self-care in that way is space is created. And then what fills that space is purpose. Absolutely. And it's not always what people like, because if you've strayed from your godly path or your almost infinite permutation of godly paths, if you've strayed far enough away from them, it might not be pleasant when you start imagining. But that's just inspiring you to take the action that you need to release the energy and let it go and start manifesting that. So it is all aligned. Like sometimes on the route to a vacation, you got to stop by a nasty travel station or a gas station with a yucky bathroom, but you don't care because you're going to an amazing vacation resort. It is practice. It's a muscle building that faith. I love what you said about capillaries. It's so funny. I imagine the same exact thing, but with my lungs, my little bronchioles when I'm breathing, when I'm doing breath work. But like same concept of fractals out to the little ones clearing and filling with God. It's easy with breath because when breath fills your cells, it's like air, you feel it. But maybe imagination can fill all the cells, your mind, your spirit, everything at once. But it consumes you. It's a dream. Maybe dream state is the highest form of imagination. And lucid dreaming is intentional manifesting. Holy shit.
Oh, I love it when like the process is going, and that's almost like feels like fractal. Sure, yeah, you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's actually interesting because I think I've always wanted to lucid dream, and I've never been able to do it. And I've tried some of those like little techniques that they tell you to practice, and like I never did anything. And just the other day, I had what was like close to a lucid dream where I was like, I feel like I was like almost conscious that I was dreaming and able to it wasn't fully, but like I was able to like move in the dream a little bit. And I found that very interesting. That's just coming in now, given like my location now being like where I grew up and where I feel like energetic portals in this area where I have very vivid memories of being a child and like being in this certain spot. I call them like snapshot memories where I can see and feel and everything, the entire scene, just a snapshot. And one of them was walking down the road and having this, I guess it was probably one of the first falling into my body, realizing, oh, this is me. What am I? Consciousness. What is this? That whole asking yourself, who am I over and over again, and feeling how you're the one that's asking. You are truly the one that's asking. And realizing what that means. And I had a flash realization of that. But given the state of stress and tension, I think that I was in from essentially from birth, I feel, and it's funny because I have a couple of baby pictures that sort of mirror this, but I feel like from the time I was born, I was like in a state of shock at the world I was born into. I was like expecting like a golden age or something. That was like my last life or whatever. I don't know, like how, I see it all as like simultaneous now, not necessarily a past life, but that's what I was expecting. And I was like in shock for almost 30 years before I finally was like coming to terms with what it was. But I was just under so much tension as a child that all of these gifts and all this beautiful stuff, like the imagination and everything, was never really fully able to like permeate into my body truly so that I could live in it and use it in the way that it was meant to be used with the human body as like the highest technology. And yeah, I forgot where I was going. Oh yeah.
No, I know that if I may, it's a whole process of learning to just identify as a soul in a body and be comfortable with the world around you and where you fit in that. And then I think everyone listening can resonate with struggling to not use their own imagination against them. In 2017, I realized, wow, I'm super programmed to think that all rich people are bad and that money's hard to get and all these like things. And I had a fascination with lucid dreaming, but I think we should do a separate episode about lucid dreaming one day, and that could be awesome. Did you find that using your willpower is how you moved in the dream? You had to like will it?
No, it was like really effortless from what I remember.
Oh, well,
But
I've had 3 lucid dreams, but the thing is, we have 3 minutes left before I have a next call. So I'll probably cut me saying that out and then think about how I want to close this and bounce it back to you to say bye to everyone and like a final
yeah.
closing message if you want to send a final message. Don't be afraid to use your imagination or something. Okay, whatever you want to say. Back into it here. Okay. Unfortunately, super out of time would definitely and sincerely. And what's crazy about this is our first actual face-to-face conversation, and it went so freaking well. We're both like stoked on a personal level as well as for the people to also hear and get inspired about imagination. Very excited. This one actually comes out tomorrow. Thank you for being so game to play ball here. It worked out super well. And any last words for our dear audience here about their imagination?
Imagination is one of our greatest gifts, I feel, and one of the most beautiful joys in my life. So yeah, use it and have fun with it.
Use it and have fun with it, and don't let society use it for you,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Use it in the beautiful divine way that it was meant.
which it automatically is when you just create the space.
Exactly. So effortless.
All right, my dear friend, we'll speak soon. Wishing you a blessed rest of your day.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thanks for tuning in to The Blunt Truth with Stephen and Dougie. Enjoy the conversation. Join us every Wednesday for more unfiltered discussions. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Your support keeps the truth coming. Elevate your journey. Connect with us on social media at blunttruthpodcast.com. Until next time, be kind, keep growing, and remember, knowledge is infinite.